Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to take a moment or two to go over a kind of like some sample rules on Armageddon War, some examples of shooting. Now, this game actually has quite a bit of depth to it. Now, I'm going to say it's maybe a little more complicated than, say, Old School Tactical. Old School Tactical definitely has some flavor and some depth to that as well. It runs on a 2 dice 6 engine with like a combat results table. And then you have, Night of Man and 65. Those are card-based driven games. So when we start looking towards, say, something like Armageddon War, it does have a little bit more rules crunch to it, but it is really, really playable. And instead of the traditional 2 dice 6, it will be using custom dice here with shapes to represent combat results. And that's what I want to show you today a little bit, is how this would work out. Now, in the rules, the rule book is actually available on the Flying Pig Games website. And if you want to go check them out, it has an example of play. Now, currently, I don't have counters for American units that I could print out. So the example here in the back, if you read it through, it mentions the American units. But the example of play is actually simple enough that I could, substitute in just about anything. So what I've done is I've just laid out a couple units so I could demonstrate some concepts here and keep it simple. And that's what I want to do. Now, as far as when is the Kickstarter, that's still in debate on when exactly that's going to happen. So, look for it. This is, I think today is 19 March 2017. So if you're looking at this some years from now, the Kickstarter's run. But if you're watching it today or sometime, no idea yet when the Kickstarter will kick in. But I still want to share you some ideas here. Now, everything you're looking at, the rules, still a work in progress. You can see it's still got draft on it. The map that we're going to use and counters, work in progress. So just keep that in mind. Things may change from what I show you. In fact, one example is even in the play demo when it shows off the hit markers. What I have today are the ones here with the trapezoidal shape, whereas in the demo they're just square. So everything's kind of subject to change as it happens. All right, so let's kind of jump into what we have here. So I've got the rules here on the iPad, and like I said, we're just going to take out a few things here. For example, there's not super complex beyond what you're used to. There's line of sight rules. There are some examples in here where there's like opportunity fire. A lot of the concepts you're used to seeing are here. I think maybe where, I really hate to say it, it's not even complicated in terms of how difficult it is to figure things out. It's just that with the rules, I think there's just a little more depth to it that it might take a little bit of time to get used to it. And I think it really kind of revolves around the dice. Now, the dice are super easy. I mean, there's only 2 shapes on them, right? You've got this explosion I've made and a shield. And the explosions represent the attacker's power, and the shields represent the counterfire, if you will. And we'll explain that concept. And the complexity comes from understanding how to modify the dice. So if we come back here, there's a section here on how to modify the dice. That, for me, so far, is the only thing that takes a moment. Is I have to look at my chart just to see what all of the benefits I get. My close range, long range penalties, counterfire, combined fire. So there's not like a whole lot. It's just trying to remember, oh yeah, I got to modify dice. So I don't want to dissuade you from that, but I'm just trying to let you know that for me, that's been the learning curve, is exactly modifying the dice. But just because I'm slow to learn stuff, the good news is the more I fiddle with the system, it becomes easier. And it's really quickly to look at the situation and go, oh, these are the modifiers I'm applying, here's the dice I'm rolling, and we're on our way. So hopefully I can give you kind of a feel for how that flows. And in time, as you play, you'll come to find out it's a very, very intuitive system, and sometimes a lot easier to use than a combat results table. Alright, so enough talking. Let me go ahead and reposition things so you can see the board better, and we'll take a look at what we got. Alright, so I've swung back around, and what we have here is up here I have a M1A1 unit and I have a T-72. I've also got an infantry loaded inside a BMP. I then have a Russian Armada and a Russian T-72B, and then down here we have an Israeli Gideon, which is like their APC, and then we also have an infantry unit loaded on top of that. Now, I'm not going to go into all of dismounting rules and things like that, but I just want to kind of show you how the shooting works a little bit. And we're going to do tanks. Let me just move this down here. Now, if you're curious about the size of everything, the units right now, they're going to be a 1-inch counter, and then the hex here, they're 1.5 inch. That way the units fit inside perfectly. I've played games that have 1-inch counters and 1-inch units, and then there's always some kind of overlap, but these things fit great. I'm an aesthetics type of person, and that matters to me. Okay, so let's take a look at how this works. So let's just say we're starting a turn, and the game plays in impulses. So I shouldn't even say turn. We're just going to start the game, because the game uses a continuous impulse system. So there's not like a beginning of turn, end of turn, but they do have things that you would do on your impulses. So it's kind of interesting. So let's say I have counters here for the different units involved. So I've got my Russian counter for one of the ISIL groups. You'll see that there's an activation chit corresponding to the name of the unit. So then I've also got Al-Zawahiri, which would activate the Abrams. And then I've got Gideon for the Israeli units. They're both with the Gideon. And then there's a Shadeda, I'm sorry, I know I'm pronouncing that wrong. And that would be that T-72 there. So these would go in like your counter cup. And I've got me, is a better word, had a little cup that I was using. There, I got me a little baggie. So basically, let's say you're starting the game. First impulse, we just grab one at random. And then we say, oh, okay, it's going to be Saleh. You can't see my tracker over here on the side, but I just stick that in the first spot. So what I want to do is let's show you that real quick. So here's the turn tracker. Well, I keep saying turn tracker, but here's your impulse tracker. It works in impulses. So the impulses are just going to keep going. So eventually, as I draw all of these units, for example, let's say I drew the Russian unit next. Now the lettering here, the numbering is cut off a little bit just because of my poster border. There's actually, when you get the full map, you're going to be able to see everything. But then let's say that this unit did everything, then the Russian unit does everything, then I would draw the next chit, and then the Israeli units would do all of their activations, and then these guys would do everything, and then finally this one would be drawn, they would do everything, and then you pull up all your impulses. So with the last one, here's the thing, the last one, the way I read it right now, they would not do anything. This is telling you that's the end of this set of impulses. So the game, it says in the rules that it's designed, there's always going to be a unit that doesn't activate. There's always that Murphy's Law. And you don't know which unit it's going to be because you're doing a blind chit pull. So when you start the next set of activations, you just keep going. And then finally when you run out, all of them except that last one to act come up. So once you get past 10 impulses, down here on the track box, you can then start tracking 10 and then pulses 11. And this will get you all the way up to about 40 impulses. So that's kind of how that works as far as continuously. There's no end turn. It's just one long continuous turn where some units get to act more than others. Well, yeah, because, at some point, if this was the last unit pulled, it's going to activate the next time around. So everybody eventually activates. It's just that every once in a while, somebody gets pulled out of the activation kind of circuit. Alright, so let's go back and see how that works with shooting. Alright, so we're back. Now, the unit I activated was this one down here. It had some infantry loaded onto the BMP. So, at this point you can make these decisions like, would I want to unload and then it costs, you know, like half movement points to unload troops. They could dismount into like the city if you wanted to, and then this vehicle could stay out here to, you know, shoot at units. You know, we could look here at the combat values. Now, this, if I had an attached missile system, I could shoot the missile system at an enemy vehicle. But what we've got right here is this is the autocannon, essentially, of this particular APC. So it has a value of 3. That means it excels at shooting at other infantry. So, or, yeah, pretty much right here, or trucks. But that's a red shield, so you're going to just match up the colors. But this infantry is loaded. So, if this APC wanted to shoot over here, we'd have to look at the secondary factor. So behind the primary color and number, there's usually going to be an explosion, and that represents secondary firepower. That means this autocannon excels at shooting unarmed troops, but since they're inside this armored vehicle, we're going to use this yellow explosion to see if we can shoot this unit, because it has a yellow shield for defense. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, because we got most games here, if I'm checking line of sight, I cross a hill. So right here, that would block line of sight. So that shooting is not going to happen. But if I look here, we do have an open line of sight. So the APC, using its cannon, could go ahead and maybe shoot at one of these vehicles. It's going to try for the T-72 because it only has a 3 defense. So we'd count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's no obstruction. We have a range of 4. Long range is up to double that. Short range is half of that. So out to 8, he could shoot, but there's a penalty. So when you look in the book, it says for long range, there's a -2 dice penalty. What that means is, here's how we determine what we roll. You start with black dice. Now, my firepower is 3. So I have 3 dice. The tank defense is a 3. So you subtract the tank defense from this. So that would mean my autocannon can't shoot. Now, you might say, but Eddie, how would I shoot at stuff then if it's always going to be 0? If my offensive firepower is always being reduced to 0 by their defense, well, this is where you can add in additional shooters. So if you had, say, if I was going to have like a T-72 fire with me, I could declare like a group fire, and then they would add +1 dice, like a physical dice, to the roll. So there are some ways to get additional dice. Flanking would help. Those are some modifiers as well. So there's different ways to modify the dice. But the basics is you take your attack number, subtract the defense. So this APC, even though it can see the tank, it can't really hurt it. So let's skip the APC. So essentially, they unloaded some infantry. That's going to be the end of their turn. Because it takes movement points to unload infantry, he would be under like the move and shoot rules, and there's a slight penalty to hit based on movement. So it would not be a very good shot for him to try and shoot a tank anyway. Okay, so that's one example of what you do with drawing a unit and deciding what it wants to do. We drew them, they're not going to do anything. Well, they unloaded. So we could give them their actions. So he didn't do a move and shoot, and they dismounted and moved. And so that's the means they've activated. So they can't fire or op fire, they can't move, but they can counterfire or do close combat with a penalty. This would have been a move and shoot. That just would have modified the dice on his attack roll. Okay, so let's say we draw next the Russian unit. So I'd put it over here on my impulse tracker. And both of these Russian tanks belong to the same unit. So let's fire the Armada. So this tank has a yellow offense number. That means it's designed to shoot yellow defense, which is the shields. So it sees this M1A1. So it's going to look here at its range of 9. 1, 2, 3. It's not short range, but it's regular range. And he has 7, and he has a defense of 3. So that's the first thing we're going to look at. 7 minus 3 is 4 black dice. You always start with black dice. Then you look for modifiers. It's not short range. Nobody's moving. There's no defensive terrain. They're all out in the open. So we do have one modifier to look at. It's hard to see here in the video with my arm blocking the light and whatnot, but the Russian tank has a red technology symbol, and the Abrams has black. Red is higher than black, so that would mean I get +1 modifier, so I could change one die to a red die. This means potentially more hits. Also, this has a yellow shield and a yellow number for defense. That means it's specialized at protecting itself from anti-vehicle shots, which is a -2 die roll modifier. So we could drop this one red back to a black, and then one more drop would make that a green. So you kind of look at the overall pluses and minuses, and you get an overall number. So you really should never have a mixture of red, black, and green dice. So you just determine all the modifiers, and then finally whatever the total bonus is together, that's what you apply to the dice. So we had +1 for the technology difference, and then -2 for the specialized defense is a -1 overall. So that's one dice down. Then we roll. Let me get my dice rolling. Wow. Okay. That's the basics of shooting. So we would look here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's like a perfect roll for these dice. So that would really mess up this tank unit. That's like 7 steps of damage, which vehicles only have 4 steps. They first get 1 hit, which is green. Then they would do yellow. Then they would go to blue. Then they're reduced. And then they're gone. Now, I mean, so this unit would be gone. They're gone because it would go through all the steps. The one thing we didn't do, which I'll demonstrate on the next shot, is you have options to retreat and counterfire, but you have to declare those before you roll dice. So this Russian unit, it fired really, really well. So it said goodbye to them. Because see, they went through 1 step of damage, then 2 steps, 3 steps, step 4. Well, so I guess there's like 5 steps altogether. So it would have been shaken and reduced, and then the next hit would have destroyed it. And since the Russian unit did 7 points of damage, that means all of its tank firing was very effective. And then that would mark the Russian unit with a green. That tells us they fired. Then this Russian tank gets to shoot. So we just check line of sight, clear, distance 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have a range of 7. So that's normal range. It's not, out to the double, so it's not long range. It's just regular range. He has a shooting score of 6. We have a defense of 3. Now that number is black, which means it's just a normal, not modified reduction in dice, because it's not a specialized defense. So we just simply go 6 minus 3. We start with 3 black dice. Then we look at other modifiers. Well, this here is a black technology. They have black technology, so there's no dice modifiers for that. Now this tank, defending, could decide does it want to retreat or will it return fire. Well, this unit is going to return fire. So you might say, well, why would you not return fire? Well, when you return fire, you do have to give yourself a step. So, when we had the Abrams unit, it could have done return fire, but it didn't roll any shields. So return fire didn't do anything. But this unit, we're going to do return fire. I feel good. I think it's going to return fire. So we'll apply steps after the combat. So I got my stuff ready. There's no other modifiers that we need for the dice. It's just 3 black dice. Okay. So, oh, you know what? I grabbed a green. Okay, here we go. So this is 3 black dice that I rolled. No modifiers. And as you can see, let's do this. The attacker scored a hit. So you would go ahead and put this. So that counter represents not only that you did an action, and every time you do something, it's just, think of it as like, the turn is like 15 minutes long. So it's not just they're shooting once. These units are continuously making actions within their 150 meter hex that they're playing. So they're moving their tanks, they're driving for position, they're firing continuously back and forth at each other. They start to lose some unit cohesion. So that represents not only that you took an action, but represents that now your people are losing some cohesion because they're driving around trying to, dodge incoming tank fire. Let's get the zoom back here. So that's why we put the 1 green hit. Well, it is focused on these dice. Now we look at the return fire. That's what this represents. Every shield is a hit on return fire. We scored 4 hits. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, luckily, you only score an amount of hits different to your attack value and the defense value here. So I have an attack of 5. He has, oh, you know what? I did forget one thing. When you do return fire, there is a modifier, and I completely forgot. You turn one of the die, it's a +1 die roll modifier for the attacker, so it would make one of those dice red. So we'll say he still rolled 2 shields. So the red shield, there's a potential that you could score. Let's just roll it. So I rolled a hit and 2 shields. So the attacker actually got 2 hits. So let's flip that yellow. So I told you, I just got to remember all my modifiers. Okay. But the defender still got 4 hits in return. So this is why sometimes you don't want to return fire, because see, once this is all said and done, because you did do an action, that's going to flip the person who returns fire from disruptive to shaken. So the last thing you want to do is have one of your units return fire, or if you retreat, you could potentially reduce damage incoming to you. But if you return fire, you're going to take another hit of disruption on your unit, a little cohesion loss. Now we have to resolve 4 hits, but there's a difference of only 2 between firepower and defense. So only 2 of those hits actually affect this unit. So you take 1, 2 hits, and a third, because you always take 1, point of hit, if you will, for doing an action. They fired, so that would have made them green, and then 2 hits from combat puts them at blue. So combat, in a way, can be pretty deadly. And that's why, there's some decisions to make. Do I counter fire? Do I just simply take the hits? Because there's a chance that, I'm going to destroy myself just through the very act of returning fire. But that's the basics of combat. I'm hoping I can put out maybe some more scenario type of situation where you can see movement and shooting. This was really just kind of focusing on the shooting and some dice rolling, but I hope that answers some questions on how things work. Like I said, The only thing that's kind of complicated for me is just remembering the dice roll modifiers, but that's any game. You know, once you have your dice roll modifiers down, then picking up dice, modifying it what you need, you roll, and it's real easy to determine who does what. There's no chart looking up. The dice give you the results instantly. So I think once you get used to the system, combat's going to run pretty smooth. Hopefully a lot smoother than my explaining. But I do want to put some more videos up. So if you have specific questions that you want answered, let us know, and I'll try and put that up as a video for you as well. Otherwise, just stay tuned. We'll have some more Armageddon pictures, videos, and things like that for you to look at. All right, thanks a lot so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Bye.